presentation by Christine and David Rhodes.
And I'm not going to give a presentation. I just wanted to sort of introduce the topic, and some of the questions were really very insightful and underscore some of the comments that I wanted to make. A little bit about myself. I joined the Department of Energy in 1993, and it was in the Office of Budget. So my first 6 years were spent working on the budget process, and it's a complicated and iterative process, and it's really quite challenging when you think about it that we are in the end of March of 2015, and we're already talking about what we're going to be doing in fiscal year 17. And it's just the nature of the federal budget process that you have to start forecasting and developing what your resource requirements are long before you figured out what you're even going to end up with in fiscal year 16. And of course, in programs like Legacy Environmental Cleanup, it's not a static activity year to year where it's easily predictable. We need to invest in projects that are multi-year and that are going to be affected by the activities and progress we make in the previous years. So the question of fines and penalties, the possibility of supplemental environmental projects, all of that could have an impact on what are our approved and currently ongoing fiscal year 15 activities, what Congress does with our fiscal year 16 budget request, any consequence or continuation of the outcome of settlement, as well as just the actual experience we encounter in fiscal year 15 and some of the decisions we make in response to the judgments of need that are identified in the Accident Investigation Board. They will necessarily have to be incorporated into our execution of fiscal year 16. So I don't think it's too late for a fiscal year 16 recommendation from this astute board. I think we should welcome those. And then fiscal year 17, we're at the very early stages of the process. And if there's one thing I'd like to just emphasize is that we've come a long way in opening up what was traditionally a very protected and embargoed budget formulation process to recognize that stakeholders and boards such as these have valuable input to provide us. And EM is a leader within the department, and I truly think a leader within the federal government in formalizing a process where we go out and solicit the input from the board members to help inform our early budget formulation efforts. So this is where we are on that. Mark Whitney, our Acting Assistant Secretary for Environmental Management, gave guidance to each of the field managers just a few months ago about what they should assume for the early stage of planning for fiscal year 17. And he gave them very explicit direction to engage the boards, engage our regulators, and get senses of priority so that can be factored into our decision making. So I hope you view this as a valuable opportunity. I want to assure you that it's not an empty request from DOE EM headquarters. We truly value your input, and I think I want to commend all of you for having the relationship and the structure and the foresight to have this on the agenda today. So that we can gain some of that. That said, I've only been the EM Los Alamos field manager for 2 days, so I'm not going to talk to you about the details of the fiscal year 17 budget. That's Dave Rhodes' job, so thank you for letting me introduce the topic.
Appreciate it. Thank you, David, for being here again.
Thank you. Most of you have seen me before. For some of the new members, I am the supervisor for the Soil and Water Remediation group for Christine. We are responsible for the execution of the work to accomplish the consent order and the individual permit for stormwater, everything except for the transuranic waste processing program and the low-level waste that we do handle. So that is Mr. Nicholas. I did want to go and just briefly set the context. I came in several weeks ago and met with the combined committee meetings and presented the updates to the fiscal year 15 and the 16 plans, which we have already kind of set in terms of where we're going. The reason we had gone back to the combined committee was as these events unfolded, as we changed what we were doing within the transuranic waste program in order to go and talk about the administrative compliance order for TRUE, we realized that we had to slow some things down. We had extra funds that were available to add some stuff mid-year to the budget. So we were able to put a few more compliance activities under the consent order program and the IP program on this year's agenda partway through fiscal year 15. Not something we would like to do. We'd hope to have this done ahead of the fiscal year. We also had a chance to talk about fiscal year 16 because there are some things, as Christine mentioned, we have the ability to switch things in and out. When we talk to the state, we'll take your inputs, their inputs, and we'll figure out exactly what is going to be funded under this next fiscal year. Leads us to fiscal year 17. We talked a little bit about the fact that we have, as a department, figured out some rough allocations for fiscal year 16. They were presented in February as the President's submittal of his budget to Congress that now they've got to go and work on an act and get us a budget before fiscal year 16 comes in. We are just starting the fiscal year 17 process, and right now there is no number established for us. And the guidance that Mr. Whitney, EM1, gave out for us was that for now, we have to go and use the number that we had for fiscal year 16 planning purposes, recognizing we don't have a number, and use that number for fiscal year 17. Now, it is going to come back in terms of what we have. The numbers that we presented for fiscal year 16 were the planning basis of $188 million and change. That's what we're using as a starting point. Whether that's the final number or not, we'll have to go and see. What we do have, though, is I wanted to go and explain those continuing type activities that we have and then get your input, not just on those, but where we have some latitude outside of a rigid compliance schedule that we have to go and meet. And this is where your inputs, we will go back, and as we get your feedback on this and your recommendations, when we actually put the budget presentations to roll up to the Department of Energy EM, then roll it up to the Department of Energy under their anticipated budget, that's what we will end up having the President submit to Congress for consideration next year. So up until February of this coming year, we won't have a number target, but that's what presentations we're going to be building in order to go and roll up to headquarters. What you see here, the chart on the left-hand side, it shows the 189 million. The next case was the 186. If you see down the bottom, that was the fiscal year 15 target and then the fiscal year 16 target. And we kind of left the 17 chart blank. The stuff that's on the right are those types of activities that we have to go and discuss. And I want to run through each of those in a little bit of detail so you understand what the context was. Top of the list is the miscellaneous programs, agreements, and principles. There are commitments that we have that are going to be paid top of the list. We have fees that we pay to the New Mexico Environment Department. We fund an oversight bureau so they can watch what we're doing. We have Los Alamos Pueblo project. We have to commit funds in order to have the Pueblos participate in their own evaluations of human health risk assessment, things like that. So there's a little bit of money that we have to go and provide for them that we don't have current latitude to negotiate. We end up looking at their expenditures, and it might change a little bit based on what their needs are, but it's roughly constant through this period. So we put that at the top of the list. We really don't prioritize it because there's almost no latitude to change what that allocation is. The next one we have is labeled number 1 priority. This
David,
is yes.
one question.
Sure.
You have the priorities there, and I think we understand that part.
Yes.
Well, I don't know what B/L means, but then you have PBS. Is that present budget status?
Oh, sorry. The column on PBS, we call that a project baseline summary. It is how we bucket our funding money. The PBS up there for 101, that's how we did the AIP, the agreement in principle. It's under its own chunk of money. I can't just use that money on the other programs. I have to go back and notify and request permission to move money from one bucket to the other. The Transatlantic Race program is PBS 13. The soil and water remediation is PBS 30. And demolition activities, decontamination, decommissioning is 40. Actually, it's 40D, but I don't think we have that on the list this coming year.
And if I could just add, this is a EM-wide numbering approach so that we can roll up and run cross-cut reports or cross-cut estimates of what we're spending complex-wide in the same series of activities. So PBS 13 is solid waste disposition. PBS 30 is soil and groundwater remediation. Other sites that have high-level waste have PBS 14, which is liquid waste disposition. So it's just a numbering and organization of our budget structure as EM.
Christine, David, can you give those again slowly, please? And next on Please provide a legend.
Sure. 101 is what we have for those programmatic commitments that we make. I'm not exactly sure of the title, but ours is labeled the Agreement in Principle. Ours for PBS 13 is our lead. The title actually is
True waste disposition.
True Waste Disposition. 30 is Soil and Water Remediation. 40 is Deactivation and Decommissioning. It includes the demolition activities. And those are the only ones that we use here.
Okay. Manuel, you have a question you want to go ahead and address?
How is that numbering system established?
Tell you the truth, I don't know where the numbering system was established other than when they developed the Department of Energy and they had to figure out how to go and fund the different types of activities. They had instituted this process and developed the numbering scheme. We just adopted what was already in place when we came in.
David,
Yes.
you put amounts there that you expect those particular campaigns to take as far as, money-wise? I mean,
Truthfully-
I think one of the things that we're concerned about
Yeah.
is that when we look at prioritization, that we can see that if a project's taken on or is a priority, that we can see some definite timeline that's gonna get completed in say 2 to 3 years or something, or 5 years, whatever.
I can talk to the size of the program in terms of magnitude, but dollar values we're not allowed to talk to on a split. Because we don't have a number for the site, I can't give you a number split per the PBSs or for the types of activities we're talking about on the list. It's very difficult for us to go and do that. Some of it depends on if it's a high priority, okay, maybe I get more done than some of the others and the dollar value of that worth will absolutely go up. If it's a low priority and you suggest we don't do it, or maybe I have a commitment to do one piece out of 8, then it's a very small amount. So having that worked out now, the value of these activities is not consistent. I can give you a rough perspective for how long the program takes, but when we're talking about one budget year, I'm carving out a piece of what that overall chunk of scope is. I'm going to use a couple of examples so that you've got a better understanding of that.
All right. Alex, you had
Yes. So, can you explain your line budget to us? So, am I to assume that the line for priority 1 is what you would need to basically complete priority 1, and this dotted line that's somewhere in between here on true ops and nitrate salt processing? What does that mean? And does that mean that you'd get half of it done, or what?
No.
Exactly what do these little incremental lines mean?
I will actually tell you what that was. The incremental lines on that, we're trying to go and say, here's the overall site budget. You got some chunks as you go up, and somewhere along that line is where we would have our funding level. As we go up the scale in terms of dollars, we would expect that the priorities would build. And in this case, the top priorities are working from the top down. As you get to that point, that's the item in there that we go and do that. It's a rough estimation, maybe where that value is relative to the others, but it is not to scale. So right now, it's just on the graph.
And
when it comes to it, we have a number come February where the president says this is what we're going to go and propose for Los Alamos. That number may be here, in which case, maybe these two drop off.
Right.
It's what you put on the chart in terms of flipping these around, in terms of what stays above the line versus what might fall below.
Thank you. On the BL, is that baseline? What's BL?
Sorry, where were we seeing?
Corrective Action Campaign, number
Oh,
30?
I'm sorry, that's a baseline program?
Right.
Those are the commitments right now that we believe we do not have latitude to negotiate, and I'm going to talk about why that's baseline.
So those have to be funded. That's what I was...
Right now, we believe they have to be funded, and they're negotiated right now at such a level that there's no latitude unless the state comes back and we negotiate changes in that baseline level of performance. Then I can go and use the difference in funds for something else. Or I have to provide funds from the lower priorities to add to whatever that baseline is. But let me go through that, and I'm going to show you some examples that'll tell you what that framework was.
Thank you.
just a second. I think there was
Yes.
a question over here by Danny.
Thank you, Chairman. David, as far as like, say, Los Alamos County government, is there a prioritization of what they're weighing in on, of what they value as more of an importance to have cleaned up today? And how does that weigh into your prioritization, respectfully, even the Pueblos?
Right now, this is the primary group that we have for public discussion of what our priorities are. We have had conversations with both the Pueblos and Los Alamos County to try and solicit their input. It wasn't a formal, here's the priorities for fiscal year 17. But as we talked to them, we addressed their comments in terms of our thinking. So it's not a same presentation that I give to this board. I haven't gone down there to give it, but we've talked to them about what we think we're doing in 17, kind of give them a heads up. But this is the primary audience that we're doing on it. Los Alamos County has given us some input in terms of what they might be thinking, but they're less interested in the budgets as opposed to the remediation activities that are specifically impacting them. So it's a different focus of the discussion than it is, hey, here's what we're going to prioritize for the year. Very different perspective.
Dan? No. Okay, thanks. Manuel, I think you're next.
Sir.
So the broken line, would that be considered a delta?
No, the broken line on this, right now, I wouldn't put much stock in this. We'd kind of use this just to kind of separate some things. So right now, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Gerard?
David, I really know you want to get on with this, but I still have one more
No, that's
question in regards to all of this in the bigger picture. I understand you've gone to stakeholders, you're going to various stakeholders like us, the county. I heard that very clear. I'm going to go back to the concern I had a couple of months ago, maybe 4. Where does this fall in line with an overall strategic plan? And what is that strategic plan? I've looked online to see the landfill strategic plan. It's in general.
Yes.
And these, I know, would fall into all action as part of that, supporting it. And I know that because the strategic plan, the strength behind it is that if anything happens, such as the circumstances that have recently happened, is that it's a live and breathing document and it can adjust to certain things, all those
Yes.
other programs may be cut more than others. And you gave that example on you know, things have to be funded at a certain point. If the president came in, at a certain recommendation, then certain things would have to go away too. But where does all of this fall into place with the strategic plan? Because we're going from year to year.
We are.
And it's obvious that, the top 3 priorities, I think, are going to continue to come out. Number 1, true waste. Can you give us some?
I'll give you a perspective on that before I get too far down the list.
Thank you.
This is a single-year focus, which is the budget cycle. The year is part of what we're looking at is the overall programmatic baseline of all that we have to accomplish under the consent order and the individual permit. The transuranic waste is not specifically addressed in the consent order. However, we have to process the transuranic waste. We've got to get it to the point where now we can come back afterwards and finish the consent order above or at those areas like TA54. So the baseline or the strategic plan that we have, our contractor, Lands, has put together a very detailed life cycle baseline, and we have kind of tabled that for now, and we are putting together a federal program baseline that addresses all the recent changes to the transuranic waste. It includes the full-scale take a look at what sequencing we would do in the future. That plan is not ready to be discussed. In conjunction with that plan, we have the administrative compliance orders that have basically made us table our discussions that we would normally have on the program direction and strategic plan with the Environment Department. We have tabled that until they resolve the discussions on the administrative compliance order we have. One of the things, the comments that were made were, when this is resolved, then we'll bring back the discussions about campaigns and talk with the Environment Department. We'll talk about the life cycle baseline, what the program milestones will then be, and how we get past the schedule problems that are currently listed in the table in the back of the consent order, which we've already said we can't meet the schedule. So we have to wait just a little bit before we roll out a federal life cycle baseline and a strategic program that the state agrees to. So any input that we get, right now we're using it year to year, but we will come back and talk about the federal life cycle baseline and potential discussions with the Environment Department. We'll probably both come back and talk about what we intend to do to prioritize the remainder of the work. Right now, that's just a little premature. Get your question?
Yes, but I've got a load of others. Because of that, I'm going to leave them alone. Thank you.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Okay.
We can let you go forward.
Sounds like we let you go. All right. We started talking about number one, which was the transuranic waste operations and the nitrate salt processing. Right now, we are not processing nitrate salts. We have put them in a safe storage condition. What that number one priority is we have to maintain that safe condition for those waste streams. And then we have to work with the state on what corrective actions are going to be required. We have to implement those corrective actions. We have to do some additional work on the facilities to allow us to do that, training of the folks that are going to be doing the future processing. Right now, the schedule to get there is very difficult, and it includes a lot of different things, including nuclear safety, conduct of ops, the maintenance and storage, facility maintenance. A lot of things go into that priority just to keep the waste streams safe. It takes a large chunk of money when you're talking about nuclear safety facilities, and we have, this is a HAZCAT 2 facility, if I'm not mistaken. It takes a lot of money in order to go keep that. We can't compromise the safety, so it is fixed. We are not going to change what we're doing to satisfy the state to get us past where we are to start doing some stuff in the future, which was why we're not providing a lot of opportunity to do that. We welcome your comments, but there's very little latitude on our part to deviate from the plan that we're currently executing.
David, are you going to have to open and then repackage a lot of?
Right now, I'm not willing to go and venture what we're going to have to do, so we will likely get to an agreement with the state, and we'll have to come back and tell you what that plan is. So if you don't mind, I'll defer. Next item, number 2. Both the laboratory and the environment department have expressed specifically that the groundwater is the next highest priority above the safe storage of the transuranic waste, which eventually we were talking about the surface stored transuranic waste that was potentially combustible. That's what's in safe storage. Groundwater is next. Groundwater includes the compliance sampling that we currently have under the interim facility-wide groundwater. It's a certain chunk of money I don't have negotiating latitude to do. It tells me what well programs, how many screens, how many samples, what I'm sampling for, and it costs so much money. The chromium that we have is the specific hexavalent chromium plume that we have beneath Mortondad Canyon that right now we had, at the beginning of 15, we had planned on $33 million just to go and do the characterization, additional wells, testing that we do in the field, laboratory testing. We still have a huge chunk of that interim measures work plan that we proposed to go and do in 16. That tapers off, but there will likely be some additional activities in fiscal year 17 that are chromium specific that are going to require continued priority. And we're not going to drop the priority just because we've done a lot of the work and let the rest of it slide. We're going to continue to focus on the chromium groundwater plume, which is why it's top of the list for remediation. Next one down is the RDX campaign. It is the other groundwater piece. The Cañon de Valle area, TA16, where we were processing it in the past, we are currently investigating primarily the perched intermediate vadose zone. It's just the region beneath the shallow surface and right above the regional aquifer. And there's a little bit of indication that we have it in the regional aquifer. It's central to the laboratory, so it takes a secondary precedence to the chromium, which is near the edge of the laboratory. But those activities are already defined. There's a certain course of action that the Environment Department has agreed with us to go forward and do. And I don't have the latitude to change that schedule unless something comes up and we sit back down with the Environment Department to negotiate. It's not nearly as big a chunk as what the chromium is. But over the next 2 years, it's less than what it is this year. Next item is the program management and support. This is where we get into what we have to do to strategize our approaches, make sure that we've got the organization in place that can go and get contracts for drillers, for testing, for anything else we go and do. It's the technical resources that go and do the permitting that we have to go and do. In order to do chromium, we have to have permits from the Surface Water Bureau, the New Mexico Office of the State Engineer. There's a lot of regulatory support that's got to be provided for the different portions of the program, and that's what that group does. I can't do work without that, so there's very little prioritization. Next one is the groundwater protection and remediation. This was the one I mentioned with the interim facility groundwater monitoring plan. I spend right now roughly $12 million a year to get all the sampling done, to get all the analyses back from independent off-site laboratories, and to get the reports back to the Environment Department that says, this is what we found. I do normally about 15 sampling campaigns a year. That's not expected to change. This particular year, we had to cut a couple of pieces out. Now I've got 17 periodic monitoring reports, which is a sampling campaign, that I owe the state. In fiscal year 16, that gets down 1 or 2, and then in 17, I'm probably back on the normal baseline of roughly 14 or 15 PMRs each year. A couple of them are quarterly, a couple of them are semi-annually, 1 or 2 are annual. But that's pretty much locked in. And unless the state comes back and says, you know what, I want you to do something that requires so much of a commitment that I have to renegotiate that, I don't have negotiating ability. So that's a compliance activity that's entirely driven by the agreements between us and the Environment Department. Surface water protection. 2 pieces to this one. Surface water is under the individual permit. Again, it's like the consent order, but it's with the EPA instead of the Environment Department. I don't have a lot of latitude. There is a certain amount of equipment that's already installed in the field. Every time it rains, I got to go back out, collect those samples, get them analyzed, write the reports. The information is used in the first one, where it's the compliance performance monitoring, in order to input to the second one, which is where we do the evaluations of constituents, the contaminants that are found in the stormwater that's running off the laboratory sites. That's where I have to go and do stormwater controls. If it rains and I get a target action level exceedance, there's something above what that standard is with the EPA, I don't have any choice but to go out there and do work before the next rain season, because I have to be able to go and confirm that what I put in now meets the requirements. I almost have no latitude. In September 2013, when we had that massive storm year, I had samples. I had twice as many samples as what I had in any previous year. It stretched our budget to no end. Now we're back to kind of a baseline year with the rain amounts, but the seasonal size, the rain season, determines how much money I have to spend. But it's kind of locked in. I don't have latitude to tell the EPA, sorry, not going to do it.
David?
Yes.
Do you have a budget just for sampling for the surface water program? Like you do, here you said $12 million for the groundwater program?
Right now this year, surface water sampling is about $6 million is a rough figure. Sometimes it's a little higher, sometimes it's a little less.
Thank you.
Just for perspective. The last item on there was the IP Corrective Action campaign. We've got alternative compliance reports that have to be developed and submitted. We've got the actual construction of stormwater controls beyond just the evaluations and the strategic planning. That's where I've got a chunk of money that goes into building stuff in the field to put a berm in, put a rock check dam, put a cap on something. Whatever it is for physical construction is that last item on that. It's driven by the strategic planning. I don't have a lot of choice. Again, I've got a time frame that the permit specifies. I have to go and do it, so there's not much negotiating on that. The difference between $5 million or $6 million is all we're talking about. It's not a significant impact. Now we get into where most of your input can be provided. Several of the activities fall into aggregate area investigations, and we've got several other items that are cleanup related and specific to some activities that are on now that we can continue in the future. The first one on the list, and what we've done is provided this table where each of the members can put down what their priority ranking is so we can start getting some concrete input from you. The Phase 2 nature and extent sampling. In the aggregate areas, we have to determine what is the nature and extent of the contamination in particular areas. We have 30 aggregate areas that are kind of large geographic regions, generally by some mesa tops edges with the canyon surrounding it. The consent order lists 30. We started under the consent order, starting on the north side of the laboratory, which had the most industrial activities and therefore also the most discharges. There were 10 on the north side. We've already completed the activity. We have 10 that are in the middle of the laboratory that we've done some investigations for to determine nature and extent, and we have 10 on the southern side of the laboratory we have not started yet. We currently have to finish some of the middle 10, and the possibility is, do you continue with the bottom 10? Right now, there is, the discussion of what the relative importance is. For the 10 we never went out and took a look at because it was just lower priority, is not knowing more of a risk than going out and trying to finish and clean up what we've already identified might be above soil screening levels. So that's something that we can go and discuss. But that's the nature and extent for Phase 2. Phase 2 is the stuff in the middle that we've done some of it, but we have not finished the work. We have to go back out and do it. And right now, those are the things that might sit on the priority list, above or below the line for funding. Next one down we have is TA21. Building 257 was the radiological liquid waste facility out at TA21. Very old facility. It was used processing when they were operating at TA21 from 1945 through DP West closed down, I think, in 2005 or something like that. So we used the facility for a long time, but that facility actually has been not being used for at least 20 years. It stopped production before they finished out at TA21. The building is internally contaminated. It's got equipment in the basement. The basements are sumps. We had to fix a roof just to make it stable because every time it rained, the contamination changed within the building. That building has to come down. So we have some additional work on there that is possible to go and do. We can de-inventory the equipment. We can go and fix the contamination. We can do some other things in terms of what that priority is for fiscal year 17. But when we talk about demolishing the facility, I have to have a chunk of money large enough to go and do that activity start to finish. I can't just take a wall down and leave the rest of it. So this is all the stuff that leads up to it, which will be done or could be done in fiscal year 17. But I've got to commit more than just that evaluation of the facility and clean out if I'm going to go and do too much in that activity.
David,
Yes.
there was a question by Irene.
Sure.
Could you address?
I'm sorry, I can't see the sign.
David,
Yes.
regarding the Phase 2 nature and extent sampling, are there any maps that identify the aggregate areas? Or where can we find that information?
Most of the aggregate areas, the boundaries have slightly changed over time. I don't think we just have a LANL map of the aggregate areas. I know that you've seen them when we talk about watershed areas, and there are generally several aggregate areas. Sometimes it's north and south type thing within a watershed. But I don't think we've actually produced a map of aggregate areas. We generally look area by area as we rescope and put things in different buckets. Each report that we do would define what that boundary is. Patty, you might correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think we've published anything.
Question. In our agenda,
Yes.
it says aggregate area, Phase 1 nature and extent sampling.
Correct.
It sort of has a map, I'm not sure.
There is a map,
If
but you,
wanna
yeah.
look at the map or not.
We can flip ahead.
But if you look in your submittals that were given to you.
Sorry about that, William. I just
There-
cut it off.
Yeah, okay. There is some detail about some of those things that he's discussing.
Yeah, there
especially
are.
the aggregate areas.
What you see on the map is roughly aligned with the watershed areas, but not all aggregate areas are shown on that map. That map would be way too crowded if we showed all 30. You wouldn't be able to read it. But right now, there are some different color bands that you have where you transition from watershed to the other watershed, and there are a couple of them within each watershed. So anyway, the Phase 2 is that middle 10 that we've got partially done that we never finished. We've got to go back out. Anything else on the aggregate areas? Yeah.
Actually, this isn't on aggregate, it's on the TA21, that's on
Yep.
the old DP road?
It is on DP Road, that little spur, that little mesa thing that comes off right where that Merrick building is in town. It's where we did the cleanup for material disposal area Bravo, where we excavated all the waste, and then now it's a nice clean surface. But this is further down that mesa than where those are. It's one of the few remaining structures. I think there are like 3 structures that actually stand above grade, and that's one of those 3.
When you took the tour, it was directly parallel to the airport. We were on the opposite mesa top.
Right. Yeah. It's not very big. It's tiny. Not the size of this room, so it's probably a little bit less than that. William, could put the list back up?
Yeah, that's fine. Is there any other questions?
Bonnie?
Okay. Bonnie, excuse me.
This might be a slight deviation, but in
That's all right.
regards to the backup waste that is probably being, held at Lanol, what does it look like? Like, just in a layman, what are we looking at? How much has been backed up since the whole WIP closure? And then, is that part of the budget that we're talking about right now at all? Is that included in that budget, or is that a
You're
completely
talking
separate
about
thing?
the backlog of the transuranic waste?
Yeah, the stuff that's not going down to WIP, obviously, it's Lanol.
Yeah,
So-
I'm not the one to answer that, but
So let me answer that quickly. Really, there are two budgets. The EM program is in charge of legacy waste, and we process the legacy waste at TA54. The TA55 folks are still producing transuranic waste. That's under the NNSA program. So there is a backlog at TA55, and they are the newly generated waste. So that is a separate issue, and it's kind of nice with the separation of our field office now, site office from NNSA. It'll be clearer to you in the future what is strictly NNSA scope for current mission and what is strictly EM legacy. So we don't have a backlog per se of EM legacy waste. It is what it was, for the last 20, 30 years. But yes, NNSA is continuing to backlog waste and fill up their vaults, and they're also using some of our storage pads, because we're the only place right now that can store true waste at Los Alamos. They are using some of our storage pads down in TA54 for their overflow waste, but they're in the process of building out TA63, which will be the new true waste storage facility for NNSA, and that'll be done in about 17.
So the feeling is, or the facts show that that's fairly safe right now, because that is an unusual situation to be happening for the area, right? So I just want, that's a broad way to ask that question, but is it feeling like it's safe?
So they are keeping it in safe storage. It's compliant with DOE orders. And what's new, or what's come about in the last couple of years, is we have what we call the pipe overpack. And the pipe overpack is a insert to a drum, which gives an additional factor of 10 safety for that waste. So when we do safety basis, safety risk analysis from a fuel pool fire, from an airline crash, from a runaway truck, if it's in a pipe overpack, it has an additional factor of 10 for safety because of the robustness of the container. And if you ever want a presentation for the CAB on those types of things that we do for safety of transuranic waste, we certainly can present that at another time.
I think that would be good, and I also think that's great to know that, they certainly they're safer than they were 10, 20 years ago. So.
excuse me, sorry.
I think Gerard had a question.
David,
Yes.
why is the TA21 building, the 257, a PBS 30 and not a PBS 40?
The PBS 40 would be the demolition. The activities that you have to go and stabilize the building, to go in and take samples, to investigate what levels of contamination you have within the facility, the stabilization of the roof, because we ended up with a hole in the roof because it had sat vacant for so long. We had to go back and patch that roof. Those operations and maintenance costs are not part of the demolition scope under PBS 40, which is why right now all of those preparatory activities are part of PBS 30.
So then, once this is complete, then it'll move over to 40?
Then it would move over to 40, correct?
Thank you.
I guess we need to try to move this along. We're getting behind the agenda a little bit, so.
All right.
If we could do that.
I'll step it up, but you'll get enough
Thank you.
information. All right. We talked about 257. The next one was Aggregate Areas Supplemental Investigations. In the last couple of years, the Environment Department has changed the way they've asked us to go and do investigation and reporting. We used to do the investigation. Here's the result. Then we did a separate risk assessment in order to go figure out what was above that risk threshold that had to be addressed and what wasn't. We are currently pairing them all up. But we have 11 investigation reports that we did not pair up the risk evaluation with it, so it was, earlier it was okay, but to meet current requirements, we've got to go back in and do that pairing. Right now, we've got 5 planned this year. We have 6 planned in fiscal year 16. There are only 11 that we have. Right now, because of our discussions with lands in terms of trying to negotiate an EM contract for the continuation of the cleanup work as opposed to under the NNSA contract. We may have some transition costs we have to go and do. We may have some changes in the way we do business. I'm going to surmise that the 5 we got planned for this fiscal year won't all be done. We've turned in 2, but we have not turned in the other 3. So whether that stays high enough to go and meet our joint objectives. If it doesn't get done this year, it gets rolled into next year. But depending upon what your inputs are in terms of how important that relative priority is, maybe next year's not 7, maybe next year is 4, and fiscal year 17 has a chance to do the remainder of those reports. So depending upon how much money we have, some of this might extend into 17, and you can give us your priorities in terms of what that was. Supplemental investigation reports. In some cases, we'll take the investigation reports. The risk is below exposure thresholds. We don't have to go back and clean anything up because we saw stuff that was less than regulatorily required and provided no risk to public or workers. In some cases where we have it above that threshold, we have to go back out and do a prioritized cleanup. For those that are below that risk threshold, we can evaluate and finish the documentation and request a certificate of completion saying those sites are done. We expect that the 11 SIRs, there are several hundred sites that, okay, yeah, in the past we had spilled something, but it's not anything we have to worry about, and we can use our money on the stuff that is above the risk thresholds. So that's what those supplemental investigations are. Next one is the interim measure, soil vapor extraction at MDAL, Material Disposal Area L. We are currently not doing anything to pull up the asphalt surface, and as long as I've got an asphalt cover, we are trying to address a vapor plume of volatile organic compounds that is in the near surface, the top couple hundred feet. As long as I have the ability to pump from beneath the asphalt cover, I get really good benefit to it. If I started cutting holes in the cover, I introduce air to the system and my response on the soil vapor extraction is significantly reduced. That is an activity we had planned for a year. It's up to a discussion with us and the state on whether there's any benefit to continuing in fiscal year 16. If there is, it may be likely that we can do that activity in fiscal year 17. But it's probably going to take multiple years to kind of get it where we want to go. But right now we've committed to a year, and then we have to reevaluate. But that's on the list as, if it's important, we can continue doing it and propose to the state that it continue. Upper LA Canyon Aggregate Area, TA32. That is former TA32. These are the historical properties that were centered around the town of, or the county of Los Alamos, the industrialized, the urban areas. We have stuff that is on the canyon walls where the new Smith's grocery store is. On the canyon walls behind Timber Ridge Apartments, we have 8 or 9 areas that we still have to finish the cleanup in the site. Because we have cleaned up those sites on private and county land, right now it's on DOE property behind those properties, access is difficult. I've got to negotiate that in order to get there. We've been able to put it off because it's not on county and it's not on private property. But we want to get in, we want to clean it up, we want to get out of the county property and private so we don't have to access them at all. We are doing 3 this year, and we still have 5 more for next year, but depending upon the priorities for 16 and 17, I'm going to surmise that there will be a few activities that will be on this list for 17 that we can discuss in more detail later on. Last one was the prioritized cleanups. When we go out in the field and do the investigations, we identify the stuff that is above soil screening levels that we have to go back out and fix. We've put those on a list. Right now, from the aggregate areas we've already gone out to at least once, we have 19 sites that we have to do. We think this fiscal year we're going to get 5 of those sites. Depend on how much we have to kind of hold off for transition expenses and addressing the administrative compliance order. We may, corrective actions, things like that, program changes. We may or may not get all of those done, which means it carries over into the following year, and depending upon how steep the budget is or the commitments that we have with the Environment Department, I expect that some of those sites will be on 17's list. Not sure if it's 2, 3, or 6, but that's where we can negotiate it. And it's going to be those sites versus the supplemental investigation reports versus Building 257 characterization. I can switch them in and out, and we can do whatever we want. You've all had the descriptive things on the fact sheets that were provided. The one for the supplemental investigation reports doesn't specifically tell you how many are going to be done this year or in 16 or would be available for 17, but at least it describes what that scope of work is to get that work done. And I think that was all I had on the presentation. If there are any more questions.
Carlos?
David, I got about 15 questions, so I'm going to go through them real slowly. I'm willing to bet dollars to dimes that come October, November, we're going to be in a CR again. I think we've been in a CR every year that I can remember, which means, correct me if I'm wrong, we're going to have to start out the first 6 months based on 14 spending?
If we start fiscal year 16 under a CR, it would be either at the current funding level that we have in fiscal year 15, not 14, unless the guidance comes out to go back a year because of something else. But right now, it's either this year's budget or it's the lower of the House or the Senate mark, which typically they come in less. So we've got a little bit of latitude, but we've got to find out what the department guidance is after we get down the road a little bit.
It generally will be the lower of the House, the Senate, or whatever your current level funding is. And the good news for us is that we're at a site level. We're not managed to the individual PDS limits. So we'll have some discretion within the limits of what
Correct.
What David has already said. We don't have a lot of discretion in, but we'll be able to make adjustments if we would need to. We wouldn't be bound to the absolute lowest by PDS.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, I guess we can go to Alex.
So I actually have a real basic question about what you're asking us to do here. So my understanding is that everything that has something in the box is off limits. And so are you asking us just to look at these ones with no baseline or prioritization in them and come back to you with how we would like to see those prioritized?
I think what they've got is they've given you a sheet that you can use as a ballot. Those with the open boxes, you can prioritize and give us your input. But I would encourage you, if you want to go afterwards and provide comments in terms of the other baseline activities, we will consider whatever input you provide.
So with the 186, can we assume that you're going to be able to conduct all of these? Or you're
No.
saying you can't conduct all of them?
I'm saying I can't get all of them.
Okay, so...
I can do parts of a couple if you
Parts
want
of
to
a
do
couple.
parts. But
Okay.
if you want to prioritize it where it's all or nothing on a particular subject area, then I could probably get, maybe I can do 4 out of 6. But even that, it might be 3 out of 6. But based on how you guys individually score it and then it rolls up, then the CAB will give us their recommendation for what they think is the priorities on it.
Okay.
Is that correct?
By the way, in your agenda, there is this FY'17 scope prioritization, and it's a list, and it asks us to try to give us the highest to lowest priority as far as 5 different programs. And they're basically the bottom 5, right, on your list there. On so we need to look at that. At this point, Alex, your questions?
That's the basic question
Stephen?
I had, but...
Yeah, I have this is more information than we've had before, but one thing that's missing here is kind of what you could accomplish in FY'17. Like, say you go to the SVE project, is there a timetable here, like we're going to run it for 5 years and we're just asking money to continue it for FY'17? For some of these others, like, well, if we get this money, we'll be able to produce a site report by the end of the year. And so it's a little difficult to judge what should be a priority without a sense of, are we talking about a project that can be done in 6 months or 6 years?
Well, let me go and use an example. The historical properties that we have in Los Alamos County, the upper LA aggregate area, we have about 8 sites left that we know we've got to go back out and do. We won't be producing a report until we finish all 8 sites. So if we do 3 that are in the books this year, or whether we get 5 this year or 3 next year, we're going to wait until all 8 are done, and we're going to provide 1 investigation report to the Environment Department for their consideration of what those results were. We can break it out and do 3 separate reports for each fiscal year, but to me, spending $300,000 to put that comprehensive a report together doesn't make sense to do it 3 times. Not unless there's some overriding reason that there's a county parcel that needs to be developed and they want to prohibit my access to get to the canyon edge in the back. In which case, maybe I'll break it out like we did with former TA32 at the Smith's grocery store.
But David, in some of your explanation, you explained that for some of these activities, it was really doing the final portion of what was a multi-year project, because some of them are underway in 15 already.
Correct.
So if I remember, your town site aggregate area was one of those examples, right? So you could get nearly complete in 17
Yep.
if that was the highest priority.
That's true.
And then TA21 Building 257, is that corrective maintenance and surveillance planning? Is that a 1-year effort that would position us then to have the approvals to go out and pursue demolition in a future year, or is that a multi-year effort?
A good portion of that is a one-time characterization type thing, but then there's the continued stabilization, which might continue for a few years until I put it in the 40 bucket and actually demolish the building. So some of this does not necessarily have a completion report. It's continuing until it gets in the other bucket, which kind of gets back to your question, Gerard.
At this point, Gerard, you have a question or 2?
It's 2. I would like to request that we have a nitrate salt processing update, probably in the future, where we're at with that. I don't know if you want to respond to that real quickly, Lee, or?
So we're hoping maybe to do that as early as May, but we'll have to see where the AIB report is. I've worked with the executive committee on, we have a master planning sheet for all our presentations, and that's certainly at the top of the list.
Great. The next one, it's kind of a pick-mody thing, but, I don't know a whole lot about organic chemistry, but if I heard you correctly, on the MDAL interim measures,
Correct.
you have organic matter plume, and for other term, a better term for me to understand, so the asphalt is holding that in abeyance?
A little bit more detail. Material disposal area L was primarily the laboratory's liquid disposal facilities, and a lot of the liquids that they had were solvents and cleaning chemicals and things like that. Liquid was poured in shafts. They were in drums. The drums may leak, and when the drums leak, that liquid then becomes a volatile compound, which you get the vapor phase instead of the liquid phase. That vapor phase has spread to a depth of roughly 300 feet below that asphalt cap. It is not migrated very much sideways, and right now it sits a bit above a big basalt layer. So we want to keep it above the basalt without letting the basalt transmit it faster than what it currently is downward to the groundwater. So as long as we can keep it where it is, which is why we're doing the activity now.
So it's not as close as I was thinking, where you have a carbon-based ceiling holding that down.
Well, right now with the asphalt cover, it's uniform across the entire MDA. The only way to get additional vapor, if I run a vacuum pump underneath that cover, the vacuum pump is going to suck something. As long as it's sucking the vapors, I'm good. When it sucks the vapors go up. It also creates kind of a back vacuum. It pulls air in from the sides of the mesa, and it potentially would suck vapors up from the bottom. But from the bottom is not really practical. You're pumping through the canyon bottoms, and there is no sidewall for air introduction. So most of the benefit is from condensing the plume and pulling it up.
And there would be no threat of volatility if they were introduced to the asphalt?
No, we actually made a determination. We do not have to put filters on the exhaust. We are about 4 to 5 orders of magnitude below risk thresholds and a permit wasn't required, neither were the filters on it. And right now, the exposures for that, like I say, they're 4 or 5 times less than the risk exposure thresholds. For that lower risk for the atmosphere, the most risk to the vapor plumes is if it gets into the groundwater and it's pumped into your kitchen. That's where the exposure is when you ingest it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, thank you, George. Alex, was it another question you had?
Specific questions. The way you present, like the aggregate areas and the site, the SIRs, we really have no idea of what you're evaluating there, because like next to each site, you don't say what the potential contaminative concerns could be, what the cost of contamination is. I have no idea what the risk is of each one of these sites in comparison to other things you're presenting here. But can you make it clear that it doesn't necessarily mean that these sites are not any less risk than some of the sites that are being evaluated right now? Or can you say that definitively?
When we talk about the 30 aggregate areas from north to south in the site, I'm pretty confident, just based on experience, that the industrial areas where we were processing on the north side of the laboratory contained the highest risk contaminants that got into the environment. Uranium, plutonium in Los Alamos and Pueblo Canyons, absolutely some of the worst stuff we have. Get down into the central areas of the laboratory, some of the primary activities were surface firing sites, where they might use high explosives for testing purposes. It's very different exposure threshold than what the uranium and plutonium was. The high explosives does not have the same carcinogens as the other stuff, not the same health effects. When you get down to the southern areas of the laboratory that have not been investigated yet, there were almost no industrial areas. What we ended up with is some of the technical areas had little analytical laboratories, not big laboratories, but they still had laboratories with drains, sumps. Some of that photographic chemicals, for example, has escaped into the environment. But it's generally localized. It is not near water supplies, so the risk from a practical perspective, not a calculated basis, would be a lot less. But if the unknown is risky and perceived to be risky, then we can certainly go and prioritize going and finding out how bad it is instead of maybe working off. I look at it as, do I go out and characterize something that I'm not really as concerned about, or do I go clean something up that I know is above soil screening levels and is already above risk exposures? So we're asking for what your field was. Most of these sites that we talk about prioritize cleanup, they're more central to the laboratory. The citizens and the public are not directly exposed to those contaminants, not right now. Time may change, and if you wait 10, 15 years with substantial rains, that may be a different circumstance.
So you lead me to my next question.
Sure.
The Upper LA Canyon aggregate area cleanups,
Yes.
These are sites that we know we have potential contamination that may actually be being mobilized right now through stormwater. Is that not correct? Like PCBs and...
In some cases, let me give you a couple of examples. On the back of the Smith's parking lot, we've got mercury contamination that has been cleaned up on the mesa top so they can put the parking lots in and everything else. But the rock walls on the side have been cleaned up, I believe, 3 times with vacuum trucks. We're going back out again to kind of scrape the crevices in the rock to see how much sediment we can get out this next time. Timber Ridge, I believe, is a PCB area where they had some stuff on the surface top well before Timber Ridge came up. It's now on the surface slope behind Timber Ridge, which we have to go back and take a look at the sediments.
Right on the edge of a water course, if I remember correctly.
Parking
Or
lot
a
drainage
tributary.
goes right to the area, and what we're trying to do is divert that rain runoff so that it's not mobilizing the PCBs that are in the soils. So yes, there are some areas out there. Some of those areas we would expect to be prioritized fairly high, but right now it's downstream of the local population, so they're not being exposed to the mercury or the PCBs.
But there could be an immediate benefit in cleaning those up to at least your stormwater runoff and
Yes.
such.
Absolutely.
Just a point here, we're getting kind of behind in the agenda timetable here. I think this is a very important item for us to vote on. I guess, David, you want us to basically prioritize these 5 items and
I
give
believe,
that to- give
I
that
believe
to
the
you
intent was to go and
today.
prioritize those items. It'll be collected by the board, and we'll end up probably getting a recommendation from the board in terms of what they would like us to go and prioritize.
Okay.
And if there are any other comments that want to be kind of summarized or attached to it, then we would take those inputs.
Okay.
So I think David put it very well. This is one of the challenges we have at DOE is that, investigation, finding out what's there versus addressing what we already know is one of the fundamental questions when we prioritize work. So we're putting you in a very difficult position today with the same question. Do we look for more trouble, or do we address the trouble we have in hand? The thought was, and you don't have to participate if you don't want to do it, prioritize these 1 through 5. Make any notes on here you want. We'll collect these. We'll summarize the results and feed them back to you at the end of this meeting for you to vote on if that's your desire.
Well, yeah, I think, I guess what we're trying to do is evaluate exactly what is being considered here, like aggregate areas, SIRs, those are not something that are considered a high priority right now. Is that right? Those particular ones?
I would not necessarily say that. The
Okay.
potential benefits to actually close some of the sites that do not require additional work would be a tremendous benefit from us. Instead of having 1,000 open sites, maybe I can get down to 800. That means I don't have to worry about whatever number gets closed between us and the Environment Department. So I'm not saying it's not important. I'm saying is there may be a big bang for the buck to go and do the SIRs. But again, you're trading that against prioritized cleanups. This is stuff in the field that is known to be above soil screening levels.
And you're looking at those 10 sites that you listed on this scope of work. Is that right?
Correct.
But in order to proceed, or identify corrective actions, then you're going to have this SIR, right?
There will
For the
be,
sites.
there will be some follow-on cleanup for those sites on the SIRs that are above those risk screening thresholds, yes.
We have to do the SIR fully determine if and what we have to do.
Correct. The 19 sites that I know about right now may eventually be 35 or 50, but I just don't know that yet until we do the SIRs.
Carlos?
Mr. Chair, I, for one, am not ready to vote on this. This is, to me, all brand new. I'm used to reading below ground, true. I'm used to hearing general's tanks, 33 shafts, MDA HL, and when I look at this is something totally brand new that it might contain that information, but I don't know. I don't have enough information as to what this means yet. I need more time.
Okay. Anybody else like to weigh in on this at the present time?
Mr. Chair, I would second that.
I would second it. I think
Second, go ahead.
I think it's really helpful and very good, very specific information. But, just remembering that all of us come from different worlds,
Yes.
I think, maybe just, would you be able to give us just, I don't know, a log line of, no, you already did it. I just think maybe we need a little more time. It is possible.
Is that the general feeling of the board? I was wondering about, you have these things here that were sort of descriptive of the 5 items on the list. And you really have to go through that to kind of, I guess, peruse what's being considered here. And then, then you can maybe do an evaluation of where you think the priority is. But it seems, it seems to me too that I'd like to be able, I guess, cogitate on this more and consider it. I guess at this time we have a motion before us to postpone this. Is that what I hear was made, Carlos? Or was it just a consideration? It wasn't a motion, right?
Well, I guess I would be open to what the board feels before I made that motion. I mean, if there's the same sort of feeling, then yeah, we'll entertain that as a motion. But if I'm the only one, then that's fine.
Well,
Sounds like you're
at this
not.
time, let me propose the following. I mean, I think we'd really like to look at this and think about it. If we take this back and you take this priority list back and we meet again on April the 8th and we're able to, really concentrate on this and ask a lot of questions. If David could be there to talk to us about it again.
I can.
I think it would behoove us to have that, and then probably we could prioritize this. Would that be agreeable at this time? I mean, why don't we weigh in? Go ahead, Manuel.
Mr. Chair, I'd like some clarification, and also forgive me for my ignorance. We have the two documents, the fiscal year base program / cleanup activities. We have 3 orders of priority, or forgive me, 4 items of priority. We also have 5 items, which are baseline items. Now, with this other form, the DeKalb Environmental Remediation Fiscal Year 17 Scope Prioritization document, these 5 items fall below the baseline. So I guess, so the question is, why are they below the baseline, and what happens to the baseline items?
Well, let me clarify. Right now, for fiscal year 15, those activities to complete what's listed is below the baseline. I don't have enough money this year to get it all done. I don't believe I'm going to have enough money next year to get it all done. So it comes down to, am I going to be able to do 3 out of the 5, 3 out of 6, 2 out of 6, 4 out of 6? If I'm going to cut 1 or 2 items out, I need to know what your priorities are to make that assessment. The statement that all of these are below the line for fiscal year 17, I believe the line is right in the middle of where this list is. So we get to pick and choose.
Dave,
Okay.
just regarding the things that we're, prioritizing numerically here, am I out of line just asking you off the top of your head, which do you think are more important? It sounds like the Upper Los Alamos Canyon aggregate area cleanup is pretty important. Not that they all aren't, and I know maybe you can't answer
Yeah.
that, but it would be helpful, because sometimes we don't know, everything.
My personal opinion may not be the laboratories. I would love to be able to spend $8 to $10 million and be totally out of any interface with Los Alamos County and private land ownership. I would like to drop that burden. However, the concentration levels, by a risk assessment, aren't something for me to put at the top of the list. It's a matter of what's the political expediency and the interface with the stakeholders that is driving that decision more than risk to the public. The prioritized cleanups, the 19 sites that I know are above soil screening levels, I would love to go out in the field and knock those out. The only thing is, they're part of broader reports that I can't get the whole report done, so there's no real document or agreement that says, I did them. Now what's the credit I get? To be able to knock specific sites off of the consent order list through certificates of completion actually is what we use to measure completion of the consent order. So I could go clean it up, but I don't get visible credit from either the Environment Department or our own DOE management because they track our schmooze that we close. So it's what I like versus what other people want to do. And I am open. I am not vetted on any of my personal priorities, and so whatever your input is, we'll use that to the best advantage.
Stephen?
Yeah, I'll try to make it quick. Is there any way we could kind of create a matrix here that you could give us, which would say for these 5 sites, risk, high, medium, or low, cost, high, medium, or low, can complete in a reasonable time, yes or no, and then not to come up with a final number for each one, but to help people kind of make a judgment with a little more information than they have now.
Does that sound reasonable?
If you want to get the collective input and send us a list of some stuff, we can see what we can pull together to answer the questions for, the 8th of April?
Well, I was thinking
Something like that? We can bring it back.
We can do an attributes table.
We can do that.
Okay. All right.
So just let us know what sort of information you are looking for, and we'll collect it, and we'll see what we can produce.
All right. Alex?
So, Mr. Chair, I would actually agree with you that maybe we could put this off until our committee meeting, and actually maybe at that point in time you could come back and any questions we have at that time, we could continue to ask questions. Maybe we can devote the entire meeting to that. No? So you're saying yes, you're saying yes.
We have something on there already, but we can certainly have this as well.
Hopefully we could devote
Enough time.
additional hour to this for consideration.
Yep.
And then-
Or if you
More
can
than
do-
happy to.
we can do some of our homework.
Right.
And maybe we won't have quite so many questions. Daniel?
Chairman, thank you. So when is your budget request due by for 17?
You know what? They've got a draft guidance out. I don't remember if they've come out with a specific date right now.
So
I'll
April
just-
won't be,
It's the April timeframe. Late April will be an initial submission at a very high level of an integrated priority list from each of the field sites will come into headquarters. And then the headquarters organization will consider those requests and make some information and prioritize among the sites within our overall compliance and risk-driven priorities. And then there will be the next step will begin where the EM will develop its budget request to the Secretary of Energy, and the Chief Financial Officer then takes control of the process, and we have to basically compete for funding, within the Secretary's overall budget limitations. So we'll be competing with NNSA for resources and the Office of Science for resources. At some point, the Secretary will make his decisions normally around the mid-July timeframe, and then we go off and come back to the sites and work to develop the very detailed budget narratives that really build out what we can accomplish at the assigned funding levels, and that goes to the Office of Management and Budget in the first week of September. And then the Office of Management and Budget has complete control of it until around the Thanksgiving timeframe, and then they give us their decisions, and then we go back and incorporate those decisions and submit the budget to Congress in the first week of February. So the site's initial input will be late April, maybe early May, but the schedule hasn't been absolutely refined. The summer months are spent with the CFO running deliberations between the programs.
thank you. So
Daniel?
is there any interaction, and I know there is, I mean, we're under, I guess, a current consent order that's been expired for some time. There's a new proposed consent order that's in draft. I mean, how do you correlate the two of what your budget recommendation is going to, budget request is going to be with the state's consent requirements?
I'm actually going to talk a little bit to that when I provide my liaison updates, so in the interest of time, is it okay if I
Fair enough.
answer that when I make my comments later?
And then just for Stephen's follow-up, for me, I mean, I would like to see a pro and con of all these recommendations, or as far as the 5 proposals. Maybe if one area would tie into another area of how that cleanup would work or how that prioritization would work. And also, I guess I'm not a new member of the CAB, but I've been here a little less than 2 years, but past CAB recommendations, have those already been fulfilled and met? And/or are any of these a follow-through to past CAB recommendations? That's all I have. Thank you.
Gerard?
David, I really respect your, I guess, your preference, your recommendation, or what you would like to see. I'm not really interested in what the political right thing to do is with this. What I'm kind of hearing is, let's go after the low-hanging fruit, bad fruit in this case. So, just tagging on to what Stephen was talking about a little bit, what Danny was talking about as well. And it's all due respect to staff needing to get some answers soon, so you can not spend endless hours in April. I agree that if we could have just a little bit more information on the pros and cons, but also be honest about what the low-hanging fruit is. I know there are political implications for you. I respect that, and I respect that for all the departments. But I think we have to be logical in this sense, too. And I think that's part of our duty to be called to serve on this board.
Sure.
Is to provide some leadership. And again, I want to be on the record that I'm not so much interested in the political aspects of this, but, let's grab at something that we can accomplish, easier attained, because many of these other things we're not going to see completed for a long, long, long time. Thank
You are correct. We'll certainly put that in the information we pull together for the next time.
I'd like to second that comment. I think that's great, the way to, well put. Let's just knock it out, Sometimes in a day you can only do so much. Let's just try to do what we can do now. I think that's really good. Political stuff out. It's not really our purview.
I think Mike wants to make a comment. We appreciate
Yeah,
it.
just a comment, Mr. Chair. Just to further,
reiterate what's been said. It is a lot to understand our cleanup program and our priorities. And so I would suggest to the board that a certain amount of time to gather the information, questions and clarifications that you would all like, as long as it's timely, perhaps get that to us in a certain time frame so that we can provide answers to you for you to proactively give your input, perhaps on April 8th. Just a suggestion.
Sounds like a plan, but it seems to me that we're looking at trying to get this, in questions. I like Stephen's idea about if we could kind of look at some kind of, what do you call it? Matrix
Pros and cons.
on risk and cost and, what the severity of the situation is somewhat, as far as, is it a threat, that is foreseeable in the future, or is it just, kind of stable at the present time? And see if we can't, evaluate that. And so I'd say, for us to get as much information we can, I think, to Manise, to forward to both Lee and Michael and David, and that we look at trying to make sure we meet on this on the April the 8th, and this will be part of the program, and we try to be able to be more up to date about what we think probably is our priority list, and see if we can submit that and then take a vote by the board that this is what we would like DOE and EM to look at as far as priority. If that's agreeable, then we can move on that.